My future mother-in-law accused me of trapping her son into getting me pregnant, but I exposed the scheme my fiancé created and shattered her illusion about him. I, 30 female, got engaged to my boyfriend of 2 years, Rick, 26 male, 2 months ago. He and I come from very, very different families and backgrounds, and it was a little difficult for me to get along with his family. His mother, Helen, in particular was the toughest nut to crack. Rick comes from a really rich business family, and well, my dad was a high school sports coach and my mom was a teacher in the same school before they retired. It goes without saying that I didn't have the same extravagant lifestyle that Rick was used to. Rick and I met through a mutual friend, and well, I didn't intend on dating him initially because he was just 24, I was 28, so it felt a little weird. But he eventually wore me down, and we ended up getting into a relationship. It went smoothly for the first few months until he introduced me to his mother. To say that Helen didn't like me would be an understatement because she made it very clear right from our first meeting that she didn't just dislike me, but she also didn't trust me and hated me instantly. She told me that she believed I was a gold digger and that was the only reason I was with her son. She'd even commented on my age and said that she didn't see why her son would pick an older woman who wasn't even that beautiful unless he'd been trapped by me somehow. Rick wasn't in the room at the time, and I was so stunned that I couldn't even argue with her. I had nothing to say and didn't tell Rick until a few days later, and all he had to say was that his mother said that to all his girlfriends to test them, so I didn't need to take her seriously. After that as well, Helen continued to put me down every time we met and just was as unpleasant as possible in general. In hindsight, I should have taken those red flags seriously back then, but I didn't, and that's why I'm in this situation right now. We dated for 2 years, and throughout those 2 years, there were several such instances where he simply refused to speak a word against his mother even though she would constantly take digs at me and try to pick fights. With time, I stopped trying to make him see how messed up it was that his mother was always so cruel to his girlfriends, and I was so in love with the guy that I was practically blind to all his flaws and red flags. So I said yes when he proposed as well, and after we got engaged, something really started happening. All of a sudden, Helen was being civil to me, not nice, but civil, like she wasn't trying to humiliate me all the time and wouldn't speak to me more than what was necessary. I thought that she'd finally stopped trying to break me and Rick up and had accepted that now that we were engaged, there was nothing she could do. That's what I'd thought, but around a week ago, that changed, and she finally returned to her old self. In fact, this time she was much worse because while at other times she would restrict herself to insulting me only when I was visiting her, but this time she actually showed up at my place to accuse me of something totally ridiculous. Rick and I still live separately because I don't want to move right now, and my apartment isn't big enough for the both of us according to him, so we're only going to move in together after marriage. Last week, Helen visited me, and she was hysterical. She was banging on the door and ringing the bell like crazy before I opened it, and once I did, she stormed in demanding that I leave her poor innocent son or else she'd take me to court. I didn't understand what she was talking about at all, and I tried to calm her down, but she was in no mood to listen to anything that I was saying. She kept accusing me of baby trapping her son and said that she wasn't going to let Rick marry me no matter what it took. Then there were the usual accusations of being a gold digger, and this time she even said that if my parents had raised me right, then maybe I wouldn't be doing something as low as this. I couldn't take that and decided that I'd had enough and I'd heard enough. I literally pushed her out of my house and told her that she wasn't welcome here ever again and that I would see to it that her son got to know what she said to me today. After she left, I called Rick up immediately to inquire about what the hell Helen was referring to. Obviously, I wasn't pregnant, so there was no baby trapping happening here. I asked Rick if he knew what was going on, and he told me that he didn't, but I could hear it in his voice that he was lying through his teeth. He just never had been the best liar, and so I insisted that he tell me the truth because his mother was absolutely hysterical that day. When he still refused to talk to me, I said that if he did tell me what he said to Helen, then the wedding was off and I'd never speak to him ever again. That finally scared him into telling me the truth. He confessed that he'd made up the whole story about me being pregnant because otherwise his mother never would have approved of our marriage, and if he went against his parents' wishes, then he could lose his entire inheritance, which is something he can't afford to lose. It's a huge amount of money, so he thinks it's okay to lie for it. Before he proposed to me, he'd asked his mother if it was okay, and she'd obviously been against it, but instead of giving up, he decided to cook up this story about me being pregnant. He told Helen that I was refusing to terminate the pregnancy and that to protect the family name and avoid any gossip and rumors, he absolutely had to marry me or else I might take this opportunity to talk crap about them and ruin their reputation. That's the real reason Helen had been so quiet and civil this whole time, not because she'd accepted our relationship all of a sudden. His plan had been to convince his mother to stay quiet and allow the wedding to happen without much of a fuss, which is why he'd been rushing everything because obviously she would question his story if I didn't start showing eventually. And after a couple of months, once the wedding was done with, he'd tell her that I'd had a miscarriage, and then he obviously wouldn't be able to leave me because who would leave a woman who's just been through a miscarriage? Throughout, Helen had been bugging Rick to try and pay me off so that I'd take the money and leave them alone and raise the baby by myself. This morning, they'd gotten into a really bad argument about how to handle the situation, and Helen had left the house in a huff, but he hadn't expected her to actually confront me about this. I was stunned that he was going to such lengths just to avoid standing up to his parents, his mother to be more precise. He continued to talk even after he'd explained his side of the story, but I stopped listening because it was all just so ridiculous. He'd found it easier to make up a story about me being pregnant rather than just being honest and telling his mother that he wanted to marry the woman he loved, and that was crazy to me. So he kept talking and trying to convince me that he'd done this for our future, and I needed to play along even after this if we wanted to get married. I told him that after what he told me, I had no interest in getting married to him at the very least. I hung up after that and didn't respond to any of his texts afterward because I had nothing more to say to him. I blocked his number on all social media accounts because I didn't want to speak to him at all. I was really hurt and lost, so I kept crying that entire day, but I was determined not to get back with him. He wasn't the right man for me, and he'd proven it time and again. I could finally see all the red flags I'd been blind to for so very long clearly, and I couldn't just go back to ignoring them again. So the next day, when he showed up yet again and was practically begging me to forgive him on his knees, I told him that I just couldn't even if I wanted to and asked him to leave me alone. He refused to budge and kept telling me that the only reason he went to such lengths was because he loved me, but he also loved his family, and he couldn't just abandon them and neither could he give up on our relationship. I was sobbing inside the living room while he begged me to forgive him right outside, and it took a hell of a lot of restraint, but I somehow managed to stop myself from instinctively forgiving him and letting it all go once more. After a while, he left, but he still hasn't given up. It's been a week, and he's still coming to my apartment every single day. It's like a routine now. He says sorry, leaves the rose outside, and then leaves. I ignored him for the first couple of days, but today I finally asked him how long he planned to carry this ritual on, and he said that he'd keep doing this as long as he needed to. Even if it took him years, he'd keep showing up to apologize to me until I finally did forgive him, and that made me melt a little. He left after that, but I haven't been able to get out of my head. In fact, every time I open the door, I see the pile of wilting roses and keep thinking about how big this pile might become if I don't forgive him soon. I don't know if he deserves to be forgiven though, and I don't even know if he's being truthful about what he said. Maybe he actually will continue to keep showing up every day to apologize to me until I finally forgive him, or maybe he won't. I don't know, but what I do know is that I miss him despite everything that has happened. I know what I feel for him, like yeah, he has a lot of awful qualities, but he can change if he works on them, and he seems like he's willing to make it work with me. I just don't want to deal with his mother anymore. Helen is a total psycho, and while I do think that Rick can still change and has his redeeming qualities, I can't say the same for Helen. The fact that she was willing to bribe me in order to take my fictional baby away from her and her family is reason enough for me to believe that even if I do hypothetically get married to Rick and then get pregnant, she'll do her best to make sure I'm never happy. She's the nightmarish mother-in-law that nobody wants, and if Rick isn't willing to let her go, then with a heavy heart, I'll have to let him go. I don't know if his apologies and his roses actually do mean anything anymore, and I'm just so lost right now that I feel like disappearing for a few days just so that I don't have to deal with anyone right now, but I can't. That's why I'm here asking strangers on the internet for the relationship advice. So Ida for dumping my fiancé because he lied to his controlling mother about me being pregnant just because he's too afraid to stand up to her, so I didn't get back with him. I went through the comments on my post, and I realized that whatever people were saying about Rick was true. Maybe he does love me, but he definitely loves his money and the lifestyle that he's grown accustomed to. He wasn't afraid of abandoning his parents because he loved them so much, he was afraid of leaving them because he loved his money way too much. He just didn't want to lose his inheritance, but he also wanted to get married to me without giving anything up. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but you can't have your cake and eat it too, and it's about time that he realizes this. I still haven't said anything to him, but he's continued to leave roses at my door, and now instead of saying sorry to me, he leaves a sticky note. I want to tell him to stop, but I don't want to talk to him because that will inevitably lead to another conversation about our relationship, and I just can't handle that right now. I've started working on a new project at work recently, and it's a pretty big responsibility, so I have a lot on my plate as it is. I don't want this crap with Rick to add to my situation. I need to be on my game right now, but I can't focus with this situation bugging me all the time. I know that the only way out of this is to just talk to him and let him know that no matter what he does, we're just not getting back together anymore. He's not willing to cut ties with his mother because he's afraid of losing his inheritance, and I'm not willing to become a part of his family since there's no way in hell I'm ever interacting with that psychotic nightmare of a woman again. She'll be my mother-in-law when hell freezes over. Neither of us is going to be willing to budge, so there's no point in dragging this out and pretending that this is ever going to work out. I tried my best to make it work for a really long time, but now that the veil has been lifted, I just can't go back to pretending that I don't see how he lets his mother control every single decision of his without a word. I cannot live with a woman like that, and I definitely cannot live with a man like him. I don't think there's any way out of this other than just talking to him and letting him down gently. I know he loves me, but if he isn't ready to put me above his family and his generational wealth, then this just isn't meant to be. I unblocked him today and finally told him that I didn't want him to come around anymore. He sounded really thrilled that I'd finally called back today, but after I told him that I didn't want him to visit me anymore, he sounded crestfallen, and I just knew that he was going to cry. So I explained to him as quickly as I could. I just couldn't be with him given the circumstances. For him, his priorities were always going to be his mother and his family and his inheritance, and after that it would be me, and I couldn't just accept that and be okay with it. I told him that I'd put up with his mother for a long time, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life always bowing down to someone else's will and doing whatever they want me to do. That's just not me. I believe that things would change with time and she'd maybe accept our relationship someday, but that's never going to happen, and I don't think he's going to try and change his mother's mind either. He's too scared of her and will never take a stand against her even for my sake. That's not the kind of marriage I want, and so it'd be best for us to part ways now. He tried to argue, but I said goodbye forcefully to end the conversation and then hung up because I don't think I would have been able to handle him crying. I've only ever seen him cry twice. Once was back when his grandmother had passed away 1 year into our relationship, and the second was when he proposed to me and I'd said yes. That was it, and I'm a really emotional person, so if I see someone or even hear someone crying, I get very upset about it as well, and then we're both crying here. If I heard him out and allowed him to cry, then I would inevitably end up forgiving him and getting back together with him. Nobody knows how hard it was for me to even admit to myself that this relationship is now over because I truly believe that Rick was the one for me. All these fights aside, he did get me, and we did have our fair share of good times. This was also my longest relationship so far, which is a huge part of the reason why I didn't want to give up on him. I don't like giving up on people in general and especially when I've already spent 2 years with Rick. I felt like I could make it work and come what may. I know now that I was wrong. I understand now that not everything is meant to be just because it seems perfect on paper, and maybe sometimes giving up is the right thing to do. It sucks, but it is what it is. So today was insane. I'm writing this late at night, so I might make some mistakes because I'm exhausted. I came back home today after a really long and tiring day at work only to find Helen waiting for me at the door. She had her nose up in the air as if this place was beneath her and told me that she needed to discuss something important with me. I didn't want to invite her in, but I didn't want her to cause a scene in the doorway since it had been difficult enough for me to explain the roses and the notes to my neighbors, and I didn't want to add screaming psycho lady to that list. So I invited her into my home, and she obviously made it a point to scrunch her nose at everything even though my apartment is very clean and tidy. The other day, she was too hysterical and panic-stricken to make me feel bad about my apartment, so she was overcompensating for it today, I guess. Sorry, I don't live in a freaking mansion, Helen. After a few minutes of awkward silence, she finally got to the point and told me that she'd come here to negotiate. I didn't understand what she was talking about until she explained that ever since I dumped Rick, he'd been devastated and refused to do anything all day. He just sits in his room, plays violent games, and only comes out at meal times. She was afraid that he wasn't sleeping enough because he had dark circles under his eyes and had started looking very emaciated all of a sudden. So naturally, she was very concerned about his well-being and wanted me to take him back. She said that she was willing to make her peace with her only son dating someone like me. Yeah, that's exactly what she said right to my face, if it meant that she'd be able to save him from spiraling into a depression phase. She said that she still didn't like me and didn't think I was good enough for her son, but if I was who he wanted to be with, then he could have me. She still did have a bunch of conditions though that I'd have to adhere to if I wanted to marry into their family. I'd have to change my last name. I'd have to sever all ties with my family. I'd have to let her raise my future kids because she didn't trust me to raise a child the proper way, and I also wasn't allowed to work anymore, and I'd have to lie about my age and make sure I don't look as old as I do. It was ridiculous enough that she was sitting under my roof and telling me what I was allowed to do, but then she made it all worse by saying that she was ready to shake on it if I agreed to her deal, and all the conditions that she just told me were non-negotiable. Okay, so first off, it was bold of her to assume that I even wanted to get married to Rick anymore or that I even wanted to be part of her crazy materialistic family, and even if I did choose to go back with him, It would be on my terms only, so she could take her deal and buzz off. When I said this to her, she got really mad and started ranting about how I was being ungrateful and that she'd been right about what kind of person I was from the beginning itself, and once again she commented about my parents and how they'd failed to raise me well enough. That was the breaking point for me. I simply couldn't stand there and allow this woman to keep hurling insults at my parents and the way I was brought up, especially when her own household was a complete mess of dysfunction and manipulation. Her constant jabs felt like daggers, each one digging deeper into my sense of self-worth, and I'd reached my limit. In that moment, fueled by a surge of righteous anger that had been building for far too long, I fired back with words I'd been holding in for what seemed like an eternity. I pointed out how, at the very least, my parents had nurtured a loving relationship that stood the test of time, something she clearly couldn't claim for her own marriage. Her husband, from what I'd observed over the years, buried himself in work day after day, probably as a desperate escape from her overbearing presence and the toxic atmosphere she created at home. It was painfully obvious, and I didn't hesitate to call it out. Moreover, I turned the spotlight on her unhealthy dynamic with her son, accusing her of treating Rick more like a spouse than a child, expecting him to cater to her every whim, to prioritize her above all else, as if he were bound to her in some twisted emotional marriage. How dare she lecture me on family values when her own expectations were so skewed and codependent? She positioned herself as some moral authority on parenting and relationships, yet her actions screamed hypocrisy. Instead of nitpicking at my upbringing and claiming my folks had somehow failed me, she ought to turn that critical eye inward and figure out how to rein in her own offspring. After all, wasn't it her precious son who had just spun a web of lies right under her nose for 2 solid months? He'd fabricated this entire pregnancy story, all in a bid to marry the woman he supposedly loved, without ever mustering the courage to confront her head-on. And let's be clear, it wasn't some profound filial devotion that kept him tethered to her side. No, it was the cold, hard fear of forfeiting his inheritance, the lavish lifestyle, the financial security that came with it. That realization hit me like a ton of bricks as I laid it all out for her, and I could see it registering on her face too. I urged her to snap out of her delusions, to wake up to the reality of her situation before she had the audacity to launch another attack on me or my loved ones. My voice was steady, but inside, my heart was pounding with a mix of adrenaline and relief, finally voicing the truths that had simmered beneath the surface throughout our fraught interactions. Those words must have struck a raw nerve because her composure crumbled right before my eyes. She flushed red, stumbling over her responses, her usual haughty demeanor giving way to flustered stammering. Eventually, she dissolved into incoherent blubbering, tears streaming down her face in a display that was almost pitiful to witness. It was awkward, embarrassing even, watching this woman who'd terrorized me for so long reduced to such a vulnerable state. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by the satisfaction of standing my ground. She'd pushed me too far, and now the tables had turned. With that confrontation reaching its peak, I didn't waste another second. I demanded she leave my house immediately, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. I warned her sternly that if she ever dared to show her face at my door again, I'd have no qualms about involving the authorities, calling the police and ensuring she faced consequences, perhaps even ending up behind bars for harassment. She gathered herself just enough to shuffle out, still sniffling and muttering under her breath, but she went without further protest. As the door clicked shut behind her, a wave of exhaustion washed over me, but it was mingled with an undeniable sense of liberation. I sank onto my couch, letting the silence of my apartment envelop me, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I allowed myself to truly unwind. The tension that had knotted my shoulders for weeks began to loosen, and I breathed deeply, savoring the peace. It's only been a few hours since that explosive encounter, but already, I have this strong intuition that this marks the end of it all. I doubt I'll ever hear from Helen or Rick again, and honestly, that thought brings me more relief than regret. Reflecting on Rick now, I don't harbor any lingering pity for him. If his love for me was as genuine and deep as he claimed, he had every opportunity to prove it. He could have packed his bags and walked away from that suffocating maternal grip the very day she stormed into my life with her wild accusations of baby trapping, the moment this whole nightmare kicked off. But he didn't. Time and again, he chose silence over solidarity, opting to placate her rather than defend our relationship. Even in the aftermath, when the truth unraveled and exposed his deceptions, he still couldn't summon the backbone to stand up to her. It became crystal clear, his priorities were skewed, with that inheritance looming larger than any bond we shared. The money, the status, the security, it all outweighed what we had built together over 2 years. I won't deny that letting go stings. There were moments of genuine connection, laughter, and understanding that made me believe in us. But looking back, those highlights were overshadowed by the constant undercurrent of his unwillingness to break free from her influence. He wanted the best of both worlds, me by his side, but without sacrificing the comforts his family provided. Well, life doesn't work that way. The money was his true anchor, so he can hold onto it tightly. I no longer resent it. In fact, I'm at peace with the idea that it might even aid his recovery from this breakup, cushioning him in the luxury he's so accustomed to. Let him cling to his wealth and his mother, entangled in that web of control and entitlement. As for me, I'll cherish my independence, my sanity, and the freedom to build a life unburdened by such toxicity. It's a trade I'm more than willing to make, and as I move forward, I feel empowered, ready to embrace whatever comes next without the shadows of their drama looming over me. This chapter is closed, and while it hurts to turn the page, I know it's the right choice for my well-being.